from far afield and setting aside time in your schedules to be with us over the next 2 to 3 days. Our conference theme for this year is exploring what it takes to enhance social accountability practice. Setting aside time in your schedules to be with us. We have the conference will be live streamed, so we'll be having participation from far afield. So please do bear that in mind. We really do appreciate your attendance. We look forward to your rich and varied contributions over the next few days. We've hosted a biennial conference since 2014. It brings together experts from across the globe who are committed to building more open, effective, and accountable governments and civil society across the globe. During the conference, we will be exploring 4 key themes: what it takes to build accountability ecosystems, to improve interaction between people and their governments. We will also look at how to better understand and navigate power relations and the significant role of media in social accountability work. A fundamental but often underemphasized element of the above themes is the importance of reflection, learning, and adaptation, and if and how these exercises can inform and strengthen accountability practice. We trust that the format and structure of the conference will meet with your needs for engagement, learning, reflection, and knowledge sharing. The conference will include a keynote address, various plenary panel discussions, breakaway sessions for smaller discussions, alongside a relaxed poster exhibition session tomorrow. You're encouraged to use the following Twitter handles, rather hashtags, to share your thoughts and profile the conference. They are hashtag SocialAccountConf 2018 and hashtag Building Accountability. Special thanks to the following colleagues at PSAM who have been at the forefront in organizing the conference: Dr. Vanessa Malila, Ms. Rachel Gondo, and Ms. Bukalwa Makasi, 3 powerful women. You are surrounded by champions, remarkable individuals, and even more remarkable and impressive organizations who are at the forefront of efforts to advance good governance, accountability, and participation. Promoting accountability and good governance is facing challenges globally. This is an opportunity for you to re-energize, to reflect, build on partnerships, and to go back to your respective desks and offices, hopefully re-energized and focused to pursue your organizational objectives. A few housekeeping issues. Our breakaways will take place in various rooms. They are marked on the program. They are the Ash room, the Beach room, and the Elm room. You will find them on your left as you exit this building. They are an opportunity for you to deepen the discussions that follow from the various panels. Toilets you can find in the corridor as you walk out. The women's toilet is on the right and the men's is near the exit. Our lunch will be served in the La Petite venue, which is on your right as you exit this building. That's it from me. I'd like to then call on Zukiswa Kota, who will moderate the keynote address by Prof. Madonsela.
Thanks, Jay. Good morning. Bon dia. Absheni. Jambo. Sanbonan. A very warm welcome, as Jay has said, to our conference this year. We really look forward to the next day and a bit of engaging with everyone. My name is Zugiswa Kota, and I work at the Public Service Accountability Monitor, which makes me very excited, particularly today, given what is about to unfold. Section 195(1)A and D of the South African Constitution speaks of upholding high standards of professional ethics and a high ethos of service. It speaks of service that is rendered impartially, fairly, equitably, and without bias. Our speaker this morning is someone who, for me and for everyone, I'm sure, epitomizes those principles. She's also someone that was part of the drafting of the said constitution, which I think is an amazing fact. She's currently the Law Trust Chair in Social Justice at the University of Stellenbosch and a Professor of Law at the University of Stellenbosch. She's an advocate of the High Court of South Africa. She's also a founder of an exciting independent organization called the Tuma Foundation, which I'm sure we'll hear more about. And democracy, if ever there was one. Time magazine recognized her as the globe's 100 most influential figures in 2014. Forbes has also recognized her in 2016 as the Person of the Year. In her 7-year tenure as the Public Protector of South Africa, her dedication to a tumultuous job was impressive. For those of us who are able to witness and observe from the rigors, from the outside, the rigors of her job, many of us listening and watching would have perhaps asked us how it was that she always remained so calm, so tranquil, even in the most trying of times. In a 2011 interview, she apparently joked that her trick was to avoid being hungry during the day. And I think that's a really kind of valuable lesson and a very pragmatic one. In a 2017 book authored by Thandeka Gqubula called No Longer Whispering to Power, a story of Thuli Madonsela, the author writes about the devastating realities of power and politics gone wrong. Through it, we see the reflections of the many socio-political challenges and the power of personal convictions to overcome them. So it makes sense to me that the woman who's written about in that book would say these two things. Firstly, and simply, that it is always possible to do better. And secondly, that we can achieve great things in our organizations and in society if we stop worrying about who is going to get the credit or whose job it actually is. She's a recipient of Transparency International's Integrity Award and of several Lifetime Achievement Awards, and also holds several honorary degrees in law, one of which is from Rhodes University, which is our affiliate university. I am therefore sincerely honored and extremely privileged to welcome an incredible leader, an inspiring activist, a defender of truth and human rights, and a woman who has shown us what speaking truth to power really looks like. A true advocate of social accountability in my book. Colleagues and friends, please help me welcome Professor Thuli Madonsela.
Thank you for that very kind introduction, and to the Public Service Accountability Monitor and all of you dear colleagues, I thank you for the privilege to join you this morning and to discuss public accountability in context and focusing on the question of how can social accountability be done. Dear colleagues, in 4 days we will be commemorating World Democracy Day under the theme Democracy Under Strain, solutions for changing the world. It was the decision of the United Nations that World Democracy Day, which falls on the 15th of September, should be commemorated under this theme of democracy under strain. You will agree with me that democracy is indeed under strain globally. I hear that colleagues in this room come from various countries, and to those who are coming to South Africa from other countries, welcome. And I hope you enjoy the hospitality this beautiful country has to offer to you. When we speak about democracy under strain, you will agree with me that probably in most or some of your countries, democracy is under strain. I must say that our own democracy in South Africa is under strain a little bit more than other countries. Why is democracy under strain? In some countries, they blame extremists that democracy is under strain. But the very fact that we have extremism is because democracy is under strain. If democracy was not under strain, we wouldn't be having extremists opting out of the system. In my view, if we're honest with ourselves, we can identify
as soon as I just do this, okay. There you go.
Well, sorry about that. If we are honest with ourselves, we can identify at least 4 reasons for democracy being under strain. The first one, which I believe applies globally, is the deepening of the challenge of social injustice. The problem of growing levels of inequality globally, and the growing levels of poverty exacerbated by the fact that the richer keep growing much richer and the poor keep growing much poorer. So that's one reason democracy is under strain. In South Africa, our democracy is under strain also because of the problem that we inherited an unequal society because of the injustices of the past, race, patriarchy, and discrimination against people with disabilities were some of the contours of social injustice in the past. What we face today is a deepening of those inequalities. Why else is democracy under strain? In my country, corruption is one of the reasons democracy is under strain. Firstly, because corruption undermines trust, and democracy feeds on trust between public representatives and the public. But in addition to undermining public trust, you have a problem in that democracy is not working for everyone, primarily because of corruption. That opportunities that are offered by a democracy go to those with corrupt links. And that obviously doesn't only diminish the extent of the democracy dividends for others, it also creates resentment when people work equally hard, if not harder, but the democracy dividends go to those with corrupt tendencies or corrupt links. Then there's service delivery in the public service. That's another reason democracy is under strain, because one of the reasons people become members of a democracy is because they want their fortunes to be improved by the delivery of services and the regulation of relationships in society. If that delivery of services does not meet everyone's needs or is skewed, then hope is undermined and trust in democracy is undermined. And again, in my country, some of the areas where there is a serious challenge of service delivery is areas such as health, education, energy, and infrastructure. The levels of democracy, literacy, and leadership are a factor in the strength of democracy. And in our case, the levels of democracy, literacy, and leadership are not where they were in the past, whether you're talking about traditional democracy or you're talking about Athenian democracy. Add to this toxic mixture, economic stagnation, then the stability of democracy is threatened. Add a challenge of some institutions being weak. In our case, some of the institutions have been weakened by problems such as corruption, including state capture. Yes, extremism is one of the factors behind democracy under strain, particularly the fact that extremism is peddled by political entrepreneurs who realize that people are unhappy about all of these other things that I've mentioned and promise them quick solutions, and they find scapegoats to blame for why things are the way they are. In this country, we've had a very vicious campaign in the past year about white monopoly capital waged by a PR company from the United Kingdom. Up to today, we can still feel the impact of that campaign in terms of the race relations in this country. But that campaign did not invent poor race relations. It exploited existing cleavages of social injustice. It exploited the fact that we're not moving fast when it comes to poverty and inequality. We talk about inequality being at 50%. We talk about poverty being at 50% generally in the country, and among Black Africans being at 64.2%. Unemployment at about 27%, and just generally a very high Gini coefficient, and that becomes a fertile ground for extremists and social and political entrepreneurs who exploit sadness and disaffection for their own political gain. Then the question you would like me to answer, though, is can social accountability save democracy? I'm assuming you would like to save democracy. I might be speaking to people who don't want to save democracy, as I did when I was younger, when I was a Marxist. When I was about your age, I was a Marxist, and I thought democracy, or Western liberal democracy, so to speak, was not ideal. That a dictatorship of the proletariat, as Marx had prescribed, was the best approach. The truth is, it doesn't matter what kind of society you have, you always have to need some form of democracy. If you take democracy being about a system where there's participation by all and decision making by all regarding all affairs of the society. And that's what democracy is. It can be articulated differently. You can see, for example, that there were African forms of democracy, and it's not true that there was no democracy, by the way, in Africa before colonialism. There was a particular form of democracy which included, traditional inherited titles, which is chiefs by descent, but also people gathering under a tree to all decide their affairs. In fact, you might find that society was even more democratic then, in that before any decision was made, everyone was called. Not members of political parties. Every villager was called to come and sit either in a kraal or under a tree, and the issue was placed on the table and it was discussed. And once everyone had spoken, the chief or the traditional leader would then summarize what everyone had said and then give their own view. Athenian democracy also was more democratic than what we call democracy today, in that each village in Athens, where democracy really was invented, each village was represented in the Council of 500. Each village was represented. And how did each village select a person? In the 5th century, it would be interesting to note that it wasn't through elections. In the 5th century, it was lots. It was you just picked up a name, like a lotto. So all the villages would have their names in the box, and somebody would pick that to make sure that everyone had an opportunity to serve in the Council of 500. And then, of course, the Council of 500 would then elect the magistrates and the generals that are like now what we call the executive. But it was so democratic that the power balance between the generals and the magistrates, who were now what we refer to as the executives, feared the Council of 500 in the same way that the Council of 500 feared the villagers. Because just not complying with your mandate could send you to jail. I mean, today we struggle to send anybody to jail from stealing. From stealing and looting, we struggle to send people to jail. And in Athens, they could just send you to jail for not complying with your mandate. But I'm just saying, sometimes when you criticize democracy, we've discovered at the Tuma Foundation that people criticize the democracy they see in their country. And they think that's the only form of democracy. Democracy is about how we find a way to decide our affairs collectively. We could do so all of us together at once, or we could do so through representatives, which is indirect democracy. And how we select those representatives depends from country to country and from epoch to epoch. For example, I am certain that the early adherents to democracy would find our democracy undemocratic today. The very fact that if you look at my country, that a minority in our nation selects the people who are going to go to parliament. Because political parties represent a minority in our country. For example, the governing party has about 1 billion people. I think the EFF has about the same. The DA has even less. So among them, they would select. But once they have sealed, we have no say on who should not be on their list. Once they have sealed, it's take it or leave it. If they've decided that they want so-and-so as their president, that's what we're stuck with. But that's not the only form of democracy. What I'm trying to say is that's not the only way. Other countries, for example, you elect some through proportional representation and some you elect through a direct constituency. In other countries, in addition to that, you have seats that are reserved for certain groups like disabled people and women. In Athens, they had seats for every village. Today, if you look at parliament, you'll find that there might be even some provinces that are overrepresented and some provinces that are underrepresented. Meaning, if you're just thinking about democracy, it depends on how it is articulated at any given stage. And then a lot of people, therefore, who feel that democracy is not working for them, they become cannon fodder for people who also just want to exploit them. And the question I had to ask was, can social accountability save democracy? And lastly, what can it take to enhance social accountability in social accountability practice? And to answer the question on what it can take to enhance social accountability practice, we must first establish a common understanding of what do we mean by social accountability. I trust, though, that I might be preaching to the choir here, because all of you are in the public service, or most of you are either in the public service or in NGOs, and you are practitioners in social accountability. I also think that, though, we need to have a common understanding of the meaning of accountability as it relates to democracy and related governmental processes. So what is accountability? My understanding of accountability is that it has an element of answerability and an element of consequence management. It just has two. Accountability is about whoever is required to account. It doesn't have to be in government. Whoever is required to account has to answer. There's an answerability, and there's also a duty to manage consequences. Managing of consequences might mean that, for example, if somebody has infringed, they take action to correct their own action. Or if they won't correct their own action, somebody else takes action to correct their action. That might be punishment, or that might be asking them to perform some kind of service to remedy the situation that they are responsible for. There are, according to the World Bank, there are three fundamental threats to the construction of good governance and the rule of law in the developing world, which is where we are. And these are corruption, clientelism, and state capture. And the World Bank says all these three phenomena refer to the use of public service, of public office for private gain, and their impact goes far beyond the simple diversion of funds. Whether we're talking about corruption, or we're talking about clientelism, or we're talking about capture, all of them have an element of diversion of public funds. They have an element of enriching those who are involved in either corruption or clientelism. They also have an element of distorting markets, and ultimately they have an element of erosion of public trust. So how do you correct that? What is our solution to these? John Ackerman, the person who identifies these three, says the answer lies in accountability. In strengthened accountability. And how do we exact accountability in public governance? The traditional way is to have the checks and balances that are built in the system. In legal terms, there's often reference to what is called the trias politica, where you have parliament or the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. The theory is that these three check and balance each other. Parliament gets a mandate directly from the people, and then it delegates some of that mandate to the executive and some of that mandate to the judiciary. And as they all serve the people, each one of them corrects each other's excesses. So that's normally how accountability takes place in modern days. And where do we fit in this whole thing? We become part of that in that we exercise indirect accountability as members of the public. We can report to a member of the parliament. If the executive is doing something wrong, we can go to the municipal council if it's a municipal issue. In South Africa, you can go to a provincial legislature, and you can also go to parliament if it's a national parliament and report whoever's doing something wrong. If whoever's doing something wrong is the judiciary, you can report the matter to Parliament. Parliament can't correct the judiciary directly, but Parliament can look at law reform to make sure that laws are changed to limit the opportunity for the judiciary to do something wrong. For example, I remember when we had to reform laws on domestic violence. The problem was that the police were always not very eager to enforce domestic violence infringements. The Domestic Violence Act was passed to clarify exactly what are the responsibilities of the police and everyone throughout the justice system. When there were problems around rape and the sentencing of rape, with the judiciary seemingly having more empathy for the rapist than it had for the alleged perpetrator than it had for the victims, minimum sentencing legislation was passed to make sure that at least when rape has been confirmed, the minimum sentence was going to be 15 years. So you can see then that's us exercising accountability, but using another structure within the system. When the legislature and the executive exceed their powers or fail to comply with what they're supposed to do, the judiciary steps in as the ultimate guardian of the Constitution in a constitutional democracy. There are two democracies. In a parliamentary democracy, the ultimate say is with Parliament. In a constitutional democracy like South Africa, the ultimate say is with the court. So how do we exercise accountability? We go to court and we say they're not doing something in a proper way, and the court brings them there to that forum to account. And that's, in other words, our role is indirect accountability. There is also a limited form of accountability when it comes to the elections. That's direct accountability. Electoral time is time we ask them questions, and if we're not happy with the way they have performed, we withdraw our consent for them to govern us, and we give our mandate to somebody else that we think is going to govern better. But social accountability provides another dimension for exercising accountability, and its emphasis is on direct accountability. The World Bank says social accountability is an approach towards building accountability that relies on civic engagement, in which the ordinary person or civilian or civil society exercise or they exact direct accountability on those they have entrusted with public power. So that is a social accountability. That's when we exact accountability to those we have entrusted with public power directly. It's not the first time that was done. I've indicated that in the olden days, this was done directly because people were part of imbizos, where people could ask questions. And in South Africa, there was also a Makatsi, that was one institution in the past, where people could report to the Makatsi, who was a semi-part of the institution. I've noted that in social accountability in China, they had an interesting thing. In Africa, we've always had the poet as Imbongi. The poet's role was to valorize those in power. In China, the poet had another different role, which was to tell those in power that they're doing things wrong. Or they were sometimes even paid to develop and recite poems to tell those in power that they're doing things wrong. You know why? Because Chinese emperors were wise emperors. Because they didn't want to be the emperor without clothes. You know the story of the emperor who was feared by everyone because he didn't like criticism. And when he was naked, he asked people what did they think of his clothes. And everyone said, "You have the most beautiful garment in the world, my lord." Until one fateful day, one brave young person said, "No, sir, you actually butt naked." Incidentally, the emperor didn't kill the person who told him the truth, because a wise emperor or a wise ruler takes criticism properly. That's why the Chinese hired poets to develop and recite poems to help them to govern better. Now back here in our time, some of the examples that we can learn from around how can it be done better. Fees must fall. You remember the young ones in Fees Must Fall, they asked, "You promised free education. You promised free education, where is it?" So they came up with the hashtag Fees Must Fall, and they followed it through until something came out of it. Pay back the money. One example was when institutions had operated in South Africa. The Public Protector, when I spoke about institutional accountability, I spoke about the trias politica. In a modern democracy, actually, you have something a little bit more elaborate than the trias politica.